Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1: The Phantom Voyage. The ocean is vast and unforgiving. A place where countless ships have vanished into its depths, leaving nothing but mystery behind. But sometimes, something far darker than the ocean itself emerges from the waves, ghost ships that drift without purpose, haunted by the souls of those lost to the sea. It was a tale told by many sailors, a chilling story passed down through the years of a ship that had never returned. But when a seasoned crew aboard the Seadrift was sent on a rescue mission to find a missing freighter, they would come to learn the truth of the legends. At first, they thought it was just another ghost story, the kind that sailors told to keep themselves awake during long nights at sea. The Phantom Mary was a ship that had vanished 5 years ago, leaving behind only a riddle and an eerie silence. Now, it had reappeared, its silhouette looming on the horizon like a harbinger of doom. As the crew of the Seadrift drew closer, none of them could have anticipated the horror they would encounter, an encounter that would change their lives forever. Captain James Albright stared through the fogged glass of the wheelhouse, his brow furrowed. The Seadrift had been sent out to find a missing freighter, the Phantom Mary, which had disappeared 5 years ago without a trace. The crew was nervous, but Albright was determined to solve the mystery. He had heard the rumors, the Phantom Mary was no ordinary ship. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed it had been taken by a vengeful sea god. But Albright was a man of logic, not superstition. "Captain," came the voice of his first mate, Peter McCabe. "We're getting close. There's something on the horizon." Albright leaned forward, peering through the fog. His heart skipped a beat when he saw it. The ship was massive, its sails tattered and its hull scarred by years of neglect. The Phantom Mary. The crew was silent as they approached, the air thick with tension. As they drew nearer, Albright could see no signs of life aboard the ship, no crew, no movement. The ship seemed frozen in time, caught between reality and something darker. "Prepare to board," Albright commanded, his voice steady but betraying a hint of unease. The boarding party was a small group of the bravest men on the Seadrift. They had already secured the ship with ropes, and now they carefully climbed aboard the Phantom Mary. The moment their feet touched the deck, a strange chill filled the air, and the sounds of creaking would seem to echo from all directions. "We should have brought more men," whispered McCabe, his voice barely audible over the wind. But Albright didn't respond. He was already scanning the deck, looking for any signs of life, or any signs that could explain the ship's disappearance. As they moved deeper into the ship, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air was thick with salt. But there was something else, something that couldn't be explained. In the galley, Albright found the first clue. A plate of food, half-eaten and covered in a thin layer of mold, still sat on the table. The candles on the shelves had burned down to nothing. But there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no signs of a violent end. "Something's wrong," McCabe said, his voice trembling. "No one leaves a meal like this unless something happened." But before Albright could respond, a loud bang echoed through the ship, causing the men to jump. They turned toward the sound, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. The sound had come from below deck. "Stay here," Albright ordered. "I'll check it out." With a lantern in hand, Albright descended into the dark, narrow passage. The air was thick with mildew, and the darkness seemed to press in on him from all sides. As he reached the bottom, the lantern flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. And then he heard it. A whisper. A voice. Soft and distant. Calling from the far end of the corridor. "Help me." The voice was enough to send a chill down Albright's spine. He stepped forward cautiously, his boots creaking on the rotting floorboards. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it was no longer a whisper at all. "Help me." He rounded the corner and froze. There, in the dim light, stood a figure, a woman. She was dressed in tattered clothing, her hair matted and soaked with seawater. Her eyes were hollow, as though the life had been drained from them. She looked at Albright with a vacant stare. And for a moment, he thought she was a hallucination. But then she took a step toward him, and he felt the air grow colder. "You must leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Leave before it's too late." Albright took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman reached out, her hand cold and clammy as it brushed against his. The sensation sent a shock of ice through his veins. "Who are you?" Albright asked, his voice shaking. But before she could answer, the ship seemed to groan in protest, as though something beneath it was awakening. The lights flickered and the ship lurched violently. Albright grabbed the woman's arm, trying to steady himself. "Get out of here," she screamed, her face contorted in fear. But it was too late. The ship's hull cracked open with a deafening roar. And from the darkness below, something stirred. A massive, shadowy form rose from the depths of the sea, its eyes glowing a deep, unnatural red. It was a creature of nightmares, part human, part sea monster, with rotting flesh and scales that glistened in the faint light. The crew on deck screamed in terror as the creature's massive claws reached up, pulling the Phantom Mary under the water. The ship began to sink, dragging everything down with it, the crew, the woman, and Albright himself. Albright awoke to the sound of water rushing past his ears. His body ached, and he struggled to open his eyes, only to be met with darkness. When he managed to push himself up, he found himself lying in a small, empty lifeboat, floating in the middle of the ocean. The Phantom Mary was gone, sunk beneath the waves, as if it had never existed at all. But Albright knew better. The creature, the woman, it was all real. The ship had been a vessel of the damned, a floating prison for souls lost to the sea. And now, Albright was part of that curse. As the lifeboat drifted aimlessly on the water, Albright looked down at his hands. They were pale, almost translucent, as though the very life had been drained from him. He was no longer just a man, but a part of the Phantom Mary's crew, trapped in the world between the living and the dead. A chill ran down his spine as he heard the faint whisper again, coming from the depths of the ocean. "Help me." And Albright realized, with a sinking heart, that the ghost ships were never truly gone. They waited, out there in the fog and the waves, for the next soul to find them, and become a part of their endless voyage. Story 2, The Abyss of the Forgotten Vessel. It was supposed to be a routine salvage expedition. A group of seasoned maritime professionals had been hired to investigate the sudden appearance of an old, seemingly abandoned ship off the coast. But the sea, as they say, has a way of swallowing secrets. And the ship they were sent to retrieve would soon reveal far more than they ever bargained for. Captain Roderick Stone and his crew had set out in the dead of night, eager to uncover the mystery of the Elysian. A ghost ship that had been sighted drifting aimlessly for days. Its origins were unclear, its passengers forgotten, and its last known voyage a tragic one. Little did the crew know that their journey would lead them into the heart of a terrifying curse. The crew first noticed the Elysian from a distance. Its massive, weathered hull barely visible through the thick fog that rolled in like a living thing. The ship was anchored in the water, not far from the island where they were to meet their contact. The eerie silence was unsettling. There were no sounds of life, no signs of movement from the ship. Yet, the ship seemed to beckon them, as though it were waiting for them to approach. Captain Stone ordered his men to board the Elysian despite the dread creeping up his spine. As they climbed onto the deck, the atmosphere felt heavy, the air thick with an unspoken presence. The ship's grandiose design suggested it had once been a majestic vessel, perhaps a luxury liner, now tarnished by years of abandonment. "Stay alert," Stone commanded, his voice low and uneasy. The crew spread out, cautiously exploring the eerie silence. As they descended into the belly of the ship, the first sign of something unnatural emerged. A faint whispering, almost imperceptible at first, seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was like a murmur of voices, overlapping and disjointed, as if the ship itself was trying to communicate. "Do you hear that?" one of the crew members, Ben, whispered nervously. Before anyone could respond, a cold gust of wind swept through the hallways, extinguishing their lanterns. In the sudden darkness, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from the deck above. Panic began to rise among the crew as they realized they were not alone. Despite the ship being seemingly deserted, the footsteps above grew louder, closer. Stone tried to regain control of the situation, but fear was beginning to take hold. "Stay together," he ordered. "We can't let fear make us rash." The group slowly ascended back to the main deck, where a chilling sight awaited them. A figure stood at the ship's helm, motionless, dressed in a tattered uniform from a bygone era. The figure's face was obscured by shadows, but its presence sent a wave of terror through the crew. "Who's there?" shouted Stone, his voice cracking. No response. Without warning, the figure began to move, not walking but gliding unnaturally across the deck, disappearing into the fog that had begun to swirl violently around the ship. "Captain," Ben said, his voice shaking, "I think we need to get off this ship now." But it was too late. The Elysian was no longer an abandoned wreck. It was alive. As the hours wore on, the crew found themselves trapped within the ship's cursed walls. The ship, once thought to be a ghostly vessel, now revealed its true nature. It was a prison. The very air seemed to grow colder with each passing minute, and strange occurrences escalated. One by one, the crew members began to vanish. Ben was the first to disappear. His last words, spoken in a terrified gasp, were, "They're here. They're watching us." Then, the whispers grew louder, clearer, disturbingly familiar. The crew had come to realize that the Elysian was not just haunted by the spirits of the past. It was a ship where the souls of lost sailors were condemned to roam, forever trapped between life and death. Stone and his remaining crew members descended further into the ship, hoping to find a way out, only to uncover a horrifying secret: the ship's captain, the spectral figure they had seen earlier, was no ghost. He was the architect of their torment. The captain, once a man named Elias Harrow, had made a dark pact long ago to turn the ship into a vessel of the dead. The ship, it turned out, was a prison for the souls of those who dared cross its path. And now, the souls of the ship's original crew sought new victims to drag into their eternal torment. As the crew ventured deeper into the heart of the ship, they discovered an ancient ritual chamber. It was here that Harrow had performed the forbidden ceremony that bound the Elysian to the underworld. And it was here that they would face the final confrontation with the cursed captain himself. The walls of the chamber were covered in strange symbols and writings. And at the center of the room, a massive stone altar Saturday drenched in blood. The whispers were deafening now, swirling around them like a living storm. Suddenly, the spectral form of Captain Harrow appeared before them, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. "You should never have come here," Harrow growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. The final battle was swift and brutal. Harrow's power over the ship and its crew was overwhelming. But in the end, Captain Stone managed to break the curse by shattering the cursed artifact that bound the souls to the ship. The Elysian began to collapse around them, and the spirits of the lost crew wailed in fury as they were pulled into the abyss, their torment finally ending. As the Elysian sank beneath the waves, Stone and the remaining crew barely escaped with their lives. The ghost ship was no more, but the horrors they had witnessed would forever haunt their memories. Weeks later, Captain Stone stood at the edge of the shore, gazing out at the endless ocean. The sea had taken many things from him, the lives of his crew, his sanity, and perhaps even his soul. But one thing remained. A lingering whisper in the back of his mind: the Elysian may have sunk, but it will never truly be gone. The sea holds its secrets, and some ships are meant to sail forever in the depths. Story 3: The Phantom Wake of the Aurora. The fog settled thick on the sea, a dense blanket that blotted out the stars and turned the night into a suffocating void. Samuel Cook, a seasoned sailor, had heard of the Aurora, the ghost ship that was said to roam the waters off the coast of New England. He dismissed it as superstition, just another tale to frighten gullible sailors. But when his own ship, the Vanguard, encountered the Aurora, his skepticism vanished. The crew had been on high alert for days as they navigated the troubled waters. The air felt different, heavy, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Then, out of the mist, the Aurora appeared. The crew first saw it just as dawn broke, the pale light revealing the shadow of an immense ship in the distance. The Aurora was unlike any vessel Samuel had seen. Its sails, tattered and torn, flapped in the non-existent wind, and the wooden hull creaked as if it had been abandoned for centuries. The ship was ghostly, flickering in and out of sight, as though it were trapped between worlds. As the Vanguard approached, the captain ordered a course change. But the sea had other plans. A sudden, violent gust of wind propelled the ship toward the phantom vessel. And despite their efforts, they found themselves too close to the Aurora. It was then that Samuel saw the figures on board, silent, moving like shadows across the deck, their faces obscured by the mist. The crew tried to communicate with the ghost ship, but their efforts were met with nothing but eerie silence. That night, Samuel had vivid dreams of the Aurora. He stood at the edge of its deck, watching as the gnostly figures beckoned him forward. When he awoke, he was drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. His curiosity gnawed at him, but a dark sense of foreboding kept him from speaking about the dreams to anyone else. The next day, Strange things began happening aboard the Vanguard. Crew members began to vanish one by one. It started with minor, unexplained occurrences, ropes being found cut, tools missing, strange noises at night. Then, one morning, a sailor named Harris was gone without a trace. His bed untouched, his personal belongings left behind. In an attempt to find answers, Samuel set out on his own to board the Aurora. As he climbed onto the ghost ship, a cold chill filled the air. The wood beneath his feet creaked and groaned, as though the ship itself was alive. Or worse, dead. As he ventured deeper into the vessel, he found remnants of a once thriving crew. The ship's cabins were furnished, but everything was frozen in time, as if the crew had vanished in the blink of an eye. The deeper he went, the more he noticed the ship was not just deserted, it was cursed. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, and the air smelled of salt and decay. Samuel stumbled upon an old logbook, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. As he read, he discovered the tragic history of the Aurora. The ship had been lost at sea centuries ago, its crew taken by a vengeful spirit of the sea. The ship itself had been condemned to sail forever, a prison for the souls of its crew. But the most disturbing entry was the last one: if you hear their whispers, you are already one of us. The whispers came soon after. At first, they were faint, like a distant hum on the wind. But then, they grew louder, echoing in Samuel's mind. The voices of the lost crew, calling to him, urging him to join them. He fought the compulsion, but it was no use. The pull of the ship's curse was too strong. As the voices grew louder, he realized he had been marked. The mist thickened around him, and the ship began to tremble, as if it were waking from a long slumber. In the final moments, Samuel understood. The Aurora wasn't just a ghost ship, it was alive. A monstrous entity feeding off the souls of the lost. He wasn't just a witness, he was part of the ship now. He tried to scream, but no sound came. The last thing he saw was the fog enveloping him, and the pale faces of the crew that had come before him, all of them frozen in a never-ending nightmare. The Vanguard never returned to port. The fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, and the Aurora was never seen again, at least not by anyone who lived to tell the tale. But sailors still whisper of the ship that sails the waters between worlds, its crew doomed to wander the sea forever, waiting for their next victim. And somewhere, deep in the mist, the voices of the Aurora still call, luring others to join their endless voyage.